Welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Jen O'Donnell. I'm the Executive Director of BioNB, and I'd really like to welcome you to session number 3 of the Canadian BioDesign virtual conference. Whether you've joined all the sessions this week or just had a particular interest in this one, we're really glad to have you with us. With BioDesign Virtual, we have been focusing on how the Canadian industrial bioeconomy can transform Canada's economy. And it's no secret that Canada has many competitive advantages in terms of natural capital. We have 10% of the world's forests, 60% of the world's freshwater lakes, 25% of the world's wetlands, and the 4th largest ocean territory in the world. Canada's agriculture and forest sectors are world leaders, and our country has a large, highly skilled workforce. We're already home to clusters of industrial biotech. That activity exists across this country, but as with many things, there's so much more potential for developing the bioeconomy. With grand challenges like population, global population growth, climate change, resource constraints, and the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments and industries are moving to a circular economy model to solve these problems. So today's panel is about disrupting the linear manufacturing mindset of take, make, and discard, and designing more circular systems for the products that we use and rely on. And of course, given the biomass resources in Canada, there are many opportunities for biotechnologies, biomass, and bio-based products in the circular model. Before we get to our panelists, I'd like to speak about the BioDesign project, the BioDesign partners, and what we've been working on. So my organization, New Brunswick, is a partner in BioDesign. The other partners are Bioindustrial Innovation Canada, FPAC, Biotech Canada, and FP Innovations, and you heard from many of them already this week. We're aligned on a vision to develop Canada's bioeconomy. With BioNB, my team works to support bioeconomy opportunities in the province of New Brunswick, where we see numerous opportunities in forestry, food production, aquaculture, cannabis, seafood processing, and product recycling. Lots of opportunities in all of those industries to implement biocircular design principles and grow the economy in our province. So BioDesign, the national network, began in 2017, and we continue to work to build a national network and a suite of resources that will enable Canada's bio-based industry to grow. We developed a strategy report that recommended actions to do this that include more modern regulations, support for commercialization, better market access for bioeconomy products, and promoting the development of more Indigenous businesses. We were able to present that strategy report to several industry and government groups and get a really positive response. So many of BioDesign's activities over the past year, more recently, have been about outreach and promotion. We really want to build and grow a robust network of companies, associations, academic and research institutions from several sectors that are focused on the potential of Canada's bio-based resources for economic growth and for transitioning to a lower carbon society. We primarily do this through social media, our newsletter, our website, and by hosting events. And so by building this network of supporters, we're creating a national cluster. This ecosystem could help create new and stronger value chains for the bioeconomy, leading to more anchor companies, more Canadian products, and more activity in international markets. So I hope that sets the stage for today's topic, and that our panelists will share their perspectives on the bio-circular economy and their strategies to disrupt linear manufacturing models. With that, I'll remind you who our panelists are. Our first speaker is Dirk Carrez. He's the Executive Director of the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, which is in Europe. Next, we'll hear from Frank van Eyck. He's the Vice Chair of the Circular Bio-Based Delta, and he's located in the Netherlands. Our third speaker is Dave Smarden, Executive Director of BioEnterprise Canada, which is a national organization that's based in Guelph, Ontario. And finally, Tracy Cassavant. She's the Managing Director of NISP Canada and the Circular Economy with Lighthouse, and she's joining us from BC. So how this will work is I'll introduce each speaker, and they'll give their remarks for about 15 to 20 minutes each. we'll move to question and answer session after that. So at any time, there's a Q&A box in your window at the bottom. Anytime you have questions that you'd like me to pose at the end, please enter them in the Q&A box and I'll draw from them. Yes, there we go. Great. So with that, I would like to move on to our first speaker, Dirk Carrez. Dirk, look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, good morning, at least for you. Good afternoon for me. So I hope you can all hear me well. So I'm the director of the European BIC and not the Canadian BIC. That's the European Bio Industry Organization, a consortium. So what I will try to do the next, let's say, 15-20 minutes is explain a bit how the circular aspect is integrated in European policies and especially linked to the bioeconomy. And so on the next slide, you can see the main topics that I will try to tackle in the next minutes. So I will give a very short introduction to the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. But then I will explain a bit where are we, at least in Europe, concerning the bio-based economy and the bio-based economy. I will especially explain you the policies that we try to put in place in Europe, linking bioeconomy to circular economy and more recently the green recovery. As an example, I will show you one initiative, which is the Bio-Based Industries Initiative, which is a public-private partnership, and then we conclude with a few remarks. So let's start with the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. So we are a consortium of companies, in fact, and our mission is really to build in Europe new bio-based value chains. So developing new technologies, products, applications, optimizing feedstock, but also to create a very good business and policy climate to stimulate and accelerate market uptake of bio-based products. And of course, during the time, the aspect of circularity, sustainability is also linked to that. So on the next slide, you can see our members. We have more than 250 industry members, large companies, but I think 75% of our members, our companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, quite important in Europe. And we have more and more brand owners, and I will explain you why this is important. We also have more than 200 associate members, which are universities, regional associations, technology platforms, and research and technology organizations. On the next slide, you really can see, and that's quite important, our members are not coming from one industrial sector, but our companies come from different sectors, from agriculture, food and feed, aquaculture and marine, quite recently, chemicals, materials, forestry, pulp and paper, market actors, technology providers, waste management and treatment. And this is very important because, as I explained in the first slide, the whole objective is to set up value chains from feedstock supply towards developing new applications, new products, and also commercialize these new products. So it's quite important that we have companies covering the whole value chain. And on the next slide, we will explain you in a few slides how important even today the bioeconomy is in Europe. In the next, here you can see that, and this, by the way, is a report that is updated on Monday, so it's just published on Monday this week. These are the numbers of 2017. It's based on the Eurostat statistics, so the most recent numbers are for 2017. But the total bioeconomy in Europe, and that includes the primary sector, the food and feed, and let's say the non-food pillar, the bioplastics, biofuels, and so on, represent a turnover of 2.54 trillion euro in Europe. The bio-based part, so the non-food and the non-primary part, so I would say the bioplastic, biochemicals, biofuels, textiles, and so on, represent 0.75 trillion euro. And also employees, employment, quite important, 18.5 billion employees in the total European bioeconomy. of which 3.5 in the bio-based industries. And on the next slide, you can see the different sectors. If you look to the turnover, you see that half of them are coming from the primary sector, I would say agriculture and forestry. We have 1/3 more or less from the bio-based and a quarter from the so-called food, feed and beverages industry. If you look to then more specifically the bio-based part, so the non-food part and also excluding the primary sector, so agriculture and forestry, then we see that this 750 billion euro turnover, half of it comes from the forest and the paper and pulp industry. And while, let's say, the other half comes from the chemicals, energy, pharmaceuticals, and textiles industry. And if you click once more, then you see that the bio-based part is still growing. I think between 16 and 17, it increased with 7%. If you look from 8 to 17, so all over a period of 10 years, we see an increase from 0.6 to almost 0.8 billion euro. So this shows that the bioeconomy is important, but we're certainly not there yet. And first of all, we can also make it also more sustainable and more linked to the circular economy. So on the next slide, and by the way, yeah, this is another 2 slides showing that the importance in the chemical industry in Europe is also increasing. The bio-based share and the organic part of the chemical industry has increased from, let's say, 10 to 15% over the last 10 years. And on the next slide, we now go towards the more, let's say, the policy part of my presentation. So economy, bio-based economy is important, but there's a momentum in Europe to make the whole economy more sustainable, more green, and more circular. And this has started in 2014, when the previous European Commission has published its circular economy strategy. So this is already 6 years ago. They wanted to make really, you know, the economy more sustainable, more circular. But what we have seen is that at that stage, it was, let's say, a strategy which was very strong on paper, but implementation of strategies is sometimes a problem in Europe. I would say the concept was there, but the implementation at European level and in the member states was still in the early phase. The new Commission, European Commission, they have published a new circular economy action plan. And this is quite different because this is with concrete actions. And the whole idea is to scale up the circular economy, not just, you know, from a few companies, a few front runners, but really to make it a concept that is accepted, that is implemented in our economy. Very important. In this action plan, it is mentioned that we should also enable a greater circularity in the industry by supporting the sustainable and circular bio-based sector. So it became clear that with the new Commission, the bio-based economy becomes an important element within the implementation of the circular economy. We also have a bioeconomy action plan, and a part of that bioeconomy action plan will be implemented via the circular economy action plan. Now, on the next slide, you can also see that the definition, by the way, of bioeconomy in Europe, quite important because this is not always the same in different parts of the world. The bioeconomy as a whole integrates, let's say, the primary sector, including waste and side streams, ecosystems on land and sea, but also food, feed, fibers, and the bio-based industry. Most of the actions on the circular economy are focusing on the so-called bio-based economy, so the non-food part. The next slide. I mentioned also already that we also, in the parallel to the circular economy action plan, we have also a specific strategy for the bio-based economy. This communication or this action plan strategy was published in 2012. One of these actions was to set up a partnership, and I come back to that a bit later. In 2017, we had a review of the bioeconomy strategy. I was part of the expert panel reviewing the strategy. And the conclusions were that there was a good delivery. Objectives are certainly still relevant. It becomes even more and more important, the bioeconomy, but we need more focused actions, and we have to make a better link to the so-called SDGs and to circular economy. And so this resulted, and as you can see on the next slide, in to an updated bioeconomy strategy in 2018, which now links the sustainable use of renewable biological resources for food and feed and bio-based products to also biodiversity, ecosystem. We stepped up, or let's say the action plan, so that we link the bioeconomy not only, let's say, to economy, a better economy, but also linked it to social, environmental, and economic, let's say, advantages that we should obtain. So sustainability is important, and with a stronger focus on sustainability and circularity. And on the next slide, you can see, I will not go into detail, but we don't have enough time, the three main pillars. We have one pillar which is focusing on scaling up the bio-based sectors, unlocking investments. We have set up, or we are setting up in Europe, a so-called circular bioeconomy funds, an investment platform. We try to promote and develop standards and labels so that these products can commercialized easier on the market, that there's also more awareness. And we try to stimulate the development of new sustainable biorefineries. There's a pillar which is also focusing on deploying local bioeconomies. So we try to make a better link to the regions, how to use regional feedstock, regional side streams, regional waste streams, how can we set up pilot actions in the regions, education, training, also important. And then there's a third pillar, which is really focusing on the ecological boundaries. So the link to sustainability to circular economy. So at this moment, as I said, we try to really integrate now more and more circular economy and bioeconomy, and also these two action plans. Now the new Commission also came up with a very important policy, which is really the red line for the next years. And this is the so-called Green Deal that you have probably heard already. And this is really a roadmap for a rapid, a fast transition to a cleaner, let's say, economy in Europe. It contains 50 actions, really concrete actions. It is cross-sectorial. It wants to make Europe the first climate neutral continent. So there's a very, very strong link to the Paris Agreement. We want to decouple economic growth from resource use. Again, circularity, bioeconomy is a crucial part in this Green Deal. There's a very important link to the SDGs, but also important, there is also a green investment plan, because implementing a plan without funding is always difficult. So it is quite concrete. And so on the next slide, you can see what is in there, let's say, for the bioeconomy and the Green Deal. So it contains key policy measures, and it represents a significant opportunity for the bio-based sector. It also provides concrete incentives for the development of the bio-based sector. And there's a huge link to, as I said, circular economy, but also biodiversity. Then it is very important, supported by the member states, because in Europe, it's quite complicated. We can develop our kind of strategies at European level, but the implementation happens at member state or even at regional level. So very important that there's a strong support by the member states. And as I said, there's a link, a strong link to sustainable development and SDGs. And on the next slide, well, before going to this as an example, I should also say that due to the whole COVID-19 crisis, the Corona crisis, Europe has also decided to integrate this Green Deal as part of their recovery plan. So they will help member states, regions, and the economy in the regions, but this recovery, this support will be linked to the Green Deal, and this is called Green Recovery. So maybe a bit not nice to say, but what Europe tries to do is also greening the economy by supporting now these sectors that can show that they will be more sustainable in the future. Now, last but not least, I will try to explain you in 2 minutes or so, one of the instruments that we have to implement this bioeconomy and the circular economy. And this is a so-called partnership between BIC, so the Bio-Based Industries Consortium as a private partner, and the European Commission. So on the next slide, you can see that what we try to do in this public-private partnership is set up value chains, innovative value chains from feedstock. And this feedstock can be, can come from agro-based, food waste, can come, of course, from forestry, aquatic-based, bio-waste, towards development of new products, new applications, but where, let's say, circularity becomes an element of the value chain. And on the next slides, you can see what can be funded via this public-private partnership. We can fund research projects. We can fund the so-called demonstration projects, proof of concept. And we can fund, and this is quite unique in Europe, flagship projects, which are first of a kind new production plants in Europe. But we're always focusing on value chains, bringing partners together that create a whole value chain from the feedstock to the new applications. On the next slide, you can see the budget. The budget is a bit less than 4 billion euro. 1 billion euro is pure public funding from the European Commission. And we have 2.7 billion from the industry that can be brought in kind, in projects, or can be additional investments, additional activities, especially in the so-called flagship projects and their own projects. And on the next slide, you can see the impact because this BBI partnership started in 2014. So what is the impact? Well, first of all, what we have seen, we have lobbied quite hard to have this partnership because we had many companies that invested a lot in research, but that went outside of Europe to upscale, to demonstrate this knowledge. So what we did now is mobilization of private investments in Europe, and we could even attract companies from outside of Europe to invest in our innovation chains. There's a growing interest in BBI grants. We have certainly developed new innovative value chains. So with companies from different sectors that had never collaborated before, and it's creating win-win situations. So waste streams from one sector can become suddenly feedstock for another sector. And so it's all about setting up, value chains, zero waste value chains. New industrial sectors that have joined and new kind of collaborations. The food processing sector joined because they could see, they could develop projects with other partners to valorize their feedstock. The aquatic, the marine sectors, the bio-waste sector have joined. And of course, we have seen more and more linked to policies, as I just explained, the circular economy strategy. And last element that I want to say is that we see more and more participation of brand owners in this value chain. The brand owners like the IKEAs and the Legos and the PepsiCos and Unilevers and so on. These are the companies that bring the products on the market. So it's very important. Their participation really helps to shorten time to market. On the next slide, I just show you what we really wanted to do. In 2014, we had all these different industrial sectors that were really working, most of the cases, in the little silo. So what we try to do via the partnership is, as you can see on the next slide, we made bridges between the different sectors. And once we have results, once we have implemented real value chains and flagships, what we try to obtain is, as you will see in the next slide, a real competitive bioeconomy, where the different companies are really linked to each other and develop a kind of an ecosystem. I'm almost there. So on the next slide, you can see all over Europe in the last few years, the different demonstration and flagship projects that have been set up under the umbrella of the partnership. So it's well spread all over Europe. And on the next slide, if you only look to the flagships, In Europe, you can see in 5 years between 14 and 18, we have 9 flagships, and they represent 3,300 new direct jobs and 10,000 indirect jobs. And with a public funding of almost 200 million, this is linked to 1.2 billion private investment. So it's also a trigger, let's say, for a private investment in Europe. So on the next slide, I will try to conclude. Next slide. So what I have tried to explain is that the bioeconomy or the bio-based economy in Europe is already a quite important economic activity, as well for concerning turnover as employment. We have several policies and initiatives that are supporting the development of a sustainable circular bio-based economy. We have a bioeconomy strategy, we have a circular economy action plan, we have the Green Deal, and we have public-private partnership as, let's say, instruments and policies. The impact of this partnership after a few years is certainly clear and visible in Europe: new value chains, new additional investments, new applications, new collaborations between different sectors. And at the moment, by the way, we are, with the Commission, trying to set up a new partnership, so the follow-up of the current BBI, with more focus on circularity, more focus on SDGs. And if I just say the name of the new partnership, it will be Circular Bio-Based Europe. So this really explains already in the name that we will have a partnership really focusing on bio-based, but with higher focus on circularity, which is also the topic of this session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. Now I'd like to introduce again Frank Van Eyck from Circular Bio-Based Delta to share his presentation with us.
Hello, good morning, everybody. It says screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again.
Well, I believe I have your slide deck here as a backup if we can't get it rolling in a minute.
Okay, we'll give it a go.
Right.
Let's see, share screen.
Can you try one more time? It should work now.
Yes, this should work. Hello there. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dirk Carrez, and I'm delighted to be here with you. Warm greetings from the Netherlands. While I'm presenting to you, I'm wearing 2 hats, actually. One of my hats is being the chair of the Circular Bio-Based Delta in the Netherlands. And that's actually a public-private initiative, and that really wants to accelerate the transition to a circular bio-based economy. So it's about inspiring and about facilitating companies. And the region we're actually representing is fascinating because it has really key players in the field of chemistry and biotechnology. It has high technology agro-food sector, unique logistic infrastructure with deep sea ports, and leading knowledge institutes, and also really involved authorities. Now, the other hat I have is the one as director of Holland Circular Hotspot. And Holland Circular Hotspot wants the circular economy to happen at the international level. And they do that by sharing best practices from business, by sharing the insights, facts and figures and tools from knowledge institutes, and sharing the hard-learned lessons from government, both national and local. Now, for us, COVID-19 was a wake-up call. As you know, the world came to a stop, supply lanes were broken, and demand decreased. And now actually there's a growing awareness in, I think, in the Netherlands, in Europe, and also beyond, that we have to build back better. So because the impact of climate change is very, very likely to be of a far greater magnitude, with deltas being flooded. Well, 80% of global GDP takes place in deltas. Regions suffering from droughts, resource-related conflicts, and quite likely much more migration. Now, so business as usual is not an option in such a scenario. And circular economy really seems like a working strategy that creates resilience, both at the economic level and at society, and creates societal value. The Dutch have a long history of working together. I live in a very vulnerable delta. Our country actually shouldn't exist. It should have been flooded long ago. So we had to work together since the Middle Ages to keep our feet dry. We have been working on waste management for the last 150 years, and now we only let's say, landfill less than 2%. But it's only since 2016 that we have a new overarching strategy on circular economy. We want to be fully circular in 2050, and we want to be halfway the use of non-renewable raw materials in 2030. That's really is a moonshot. Now, it started in 2016. We got support from a large coalition of stakeholders in 2017, and it was made specific in 4-year plans around 2018, 2019. Now, key of it is that we focus on, let's say, 5 transition areas, of which biomass and food is one. Why is this focus important? Because it allows a critical mass of stakeholders to follow. But having a moonshot strategy, ambition to be fully circular and have 5 transition agenda is not enough. You need to tweak the system, as we say. So you have to work on a set of, let's say, interventions like fostering legislation and regulation. You have to work on the market incentives, the carrots and the sticks, if you want. You have to work on, let's say, finance. Typically circular, let's say, solutions have a far better total cost of ownership, but the initial cost might be higher. So you have to tweak the financial system as well. It's about new incentives for, let's say, R&D. At this moment, for instance, circular windmills or chemical recycling are very hot in the Netherlands. But it's also about behavior, about how you and me, how we separate our waste, or if we buy goods or we choose for a product as a service. And it's about international collaboration, what Holland Circular Hotspot is doing. So it's actually sharing the hard-learned lessons from the government, what works and what works not. And one thing we learned is that the business perspective is really key for scaling up, because in the end, they have to invest, they have to show guts, they have to accelerate the transition. And there is this guy you see in your upper right screen that was the former boss of the chemical company DSM. He said something really nice. He said, how can you claim to be successful as a company in society that fails? And he's right, this is about future markets. And it makes also business sense to go circular, because if you have platform models, let's say the market will grow, there will be more revenue. And if you give something a second, a third, or a fourth life, it means more value from the same amount of materials. And if you work together in a value chain, if you communicate, then it means less risk. And the first step is often a no-brainer. If you use less materials, less energy, less water, it's about less cost. So it seems sensible to go down this road. Now for us, let's say circular economy is a system change. I grew up with reduce, reuse, recycle, but actually in a circular economy, we have 9 R's. When you make and use products in the design phase, it's about refuse, rethink, reduce. And once you're in the use phase, it's about keeping materials in the loop by reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, and repurpose. And it's only at the end that we have to think about recycling and recover. But that's the last step. It's also less value. Your telephone as a recyclate is maybe 3 or 4 euros material value. If you refurbish it, you're talking about 200 euros. So if you look at this curve on the right side, if you don't do anything, you will lose out. If you have a blind spot, you will lose. If you see, often you start with making better use of raw materials or waste management. But if you stay there, then you will lose out again, because there will be all these fancy new platform models who will disrupt your system. So you have to keep moving, learn fast, fail fast, and go on. Now that's the phase where we are in right now. Now, let's make it a little bit more pragmatic, what it all means. Let's go to a number of market segments and just give some examples. Now let's look at the world of agro-food. You know that something is not, let's say, functioning very well. We waste 1/3 of all our food. We have to double food production towards 2050 to feed the world. But if you look from the beginning of the value chain to the end, there are plenty of opportunities to act upon. So it's also, well, it accounts for 24% of global greenhouse gases. And by going circular, you can at least, let's say, reduce it by almost 50%. Now, let's show you some examples what you can do. One thing is, for instance, new protein sources. You can grow the larvae of black soldier flies on organic waste. You harvest the larvae, which is 65% proteins, and you can use it as fish feed. It makes very much sense as a new protein source, and it's very, very efficient. Then the vegetarian butcher. I think even pre-COVID, the trend for healthy food, organic food, biological food was increasing. I think in supermarkets, it's something like 8% a year increase. During COVID-19, people got even more incentivized to think about healthier food. So there is a strong need in, let's say, meat replacements. And this company, the vegetarian butcher, is providing that. And actually, they have been acquired by Unilever recently. And talking about food waste, if you're at the expiry date in a supermarket, you cannot sell products anymore. But they are still perfectly suitable to make soups or pasta sauces, and that's what the Surplus Food Factory, the Verspillings Fabriek, is doing in the Netherlands. And in Vancouver, I know there is an equivalent as well. Another example is from the Amsterdam region. It's a 2-container-sized digester, really small scale. And at the end of every day, they take the waste from the organic waste from 14 restaurants and they turn it again into energy. So very low-level, bottom-up initiatives for local areas. And did you know that your old mango peels can be turned into leather, fruit leather? I've seen the most amazing shoes and bags made from mango peels, actually. So those things exist already today. And actually, when you squeeze an orange and you have this orange peel in your hand, what do you see? Do you see waste, organic waste, which you have to dispose of as a cost? Or do you look at it better and you see, hey, this is potential textile or perfume? And that's exactly what Renewi and the Peel Pioneer do. So Renewi is picking up together with the Jumbo retailers, one of the biggest Dutch supermarket chains, with 150 branches participating. They pick up the peels, they bring them to Peel Pioneers, and they make new raw materials like cellulose or pectin. Another example is bioresin. They call it the profitable way to make bioaromatics. And this center, bioresin, is probably one of the most advanced value research programs worldwide. It's powered by TNO and Vito, a Dutch and a Belgium Science Institute. And aromatics are important because they're building blocks for, let's say, the chemical industry. Probably 40% of all chemicals are aromatic. So they provide sustainable alternatives to petrochemical aromatics, and which can be used. So here they are basically piloting if the process is working and preparing it for a next phase, a demonstration phase. Now, let's move to another area, the plastic value chain. You know probably that's something, it's a fantastic material, seriously, but they have a tremendous issue because only 40% is actually recycled and 32% ends up in the ocean. So, but if you look again from the beginning of the value chain to the end of the value chain, there's so many things you can do, like let's say bio-based plastics and mechanical recycling, chemical recycling, reuse. Let me focus on just one example, which is very close to the topic we are having today, and that's chemical recycling. Now, you know, plastics is a hot topic everywhere. We have a recycling target of 70% in the Netherlands for plastic packaging. And that currently we are front runner in the world together with Germany, Belgium. We only recycle 50% mechanically. So we still have a huge gap. And within the world of waste management, chemical recycling is really a trending topic. But it's also highly relevant for the chemical industry as well, because they are on a transition path towards green chemistry. The future for the chemical industry is, of course, that all their energy is renewable, but their feedstock is either bio-based or, let's say, or other waste. So could chemical recycling be a technology to close this gap? It's actually quite a mix of different approaches. It's dissolution, depolymerization, pyrolysis, gasification, all entering different phases of the value chain, but they're all very, very promising. Let me show you just one, which is ionica, depolymerization of PET recycling, combined with magnetic density fluid separation, and they produce a very transparent PAT flake, which is of high value. As you know, let's say in the bio-based economy, probably you're talking about time to market of 5 years, sometimes even 10 years for some. So we need to scale it up. We need to accelerate all kinds of investigations. And this pyrolysis pilot plant in Moerdijk is interesting because they're, let's say, experimenting with different kinds of organic feedstocks, but also car tires, sewage sludge, plastic foils, and with different types of pyrolysis technologies, and to see how they can valorize them. And of course, what they want to do is prepare them to a higher technological readiness level, from proof of concept to demonstration to, let's say, hopefully a flagship project. It doesn't stop here. Also in the built environment, there are plenty of examples for the bioeconomy. Again, from the beginning of the value chain to the end of the value chain, there are so much options with renewable resources, buildings as a service, sharing, repairing, maintaining, reuse, recycle, refurbish, remanufacture. Let me zoom on some which have a link with the bioeconomy. Now, jeans, for instance, we wear jeans, we repair jeans, sometimes we even share jeans, but there is a moment that you cannot do that anymore, but you can still reuse the fibers, for instance, as an isolation model. And actually fully bio-based composite bridges exist at the University of Eindhoven, Technological University. And what they do is that they have flax and hemp fibers, and they put it around in a PLA foam core in a bioresin. This is not this is a meter-long bridge, and for 1 year they will test it fully with sensors how it's performing, but it exists today. And then an example which you might have heard of already last Wednesday by a colleague of mine, Joop Groen from the Circular Bio-Based Delta, is the Chaplin Consortium, and they are focusing on bioasphalt, replacing bitumen in Dutch asphalt on a large scale with a natural binder, which is lignin. Now there are already 15 strips operational in the Netherlands, and also one of 10 to 50 kilometer stretch. And by replacing just half of the bitumen with lignin, you can really reduce the greenhouse gases already with 20%. And it's the material lignin is really produced in enormous quantity, for instance, in the paper industry. And if you look at the availability in Europe, it's massive. So the market is ready to gradually replace bitumen with lignin. So it's an extremely interesting project. The interesting part of this project is also that basically they've lined up all the value chain, all the players from beginning of the value chain, end of the value chain, public players, knowledge institutions, this consortium. Then here we are in the town waste incinerator of AVR. They capture the carbon dioxide from their stack and they bring it to the neighbors, where a greenhouse where they grow strawberries, from residual waste to strawberries. Now, circular economy actually needs to scale up, and I think there is a key role for chemistry here, chemistry driven by sustainable energy, by renewable carbon sources. Because waste managers, and I used to be a garbage guy myself, we tend to think in terms of maybe 20,000 tons, but the chemical industry thinks in millions of tons. So the chemical industry can be really a game changer. However, the industry is still highly focused on efficiency, slightly risk averse, and it's very much connected with lots of interdependency. So it's not an easy transition, but one we must make. And to show you what that means at the country scale, in the Netherlands, we have a coalition agreement to reduce, let's say, carbon dioxide by 49% in 2030, but that's massive. That means in transition for, let's say, the built environment, for the industry, for the mobility sector. And that means that, let's say, our renewable energy has to come from wind farms on sea. The energy has to be transported to the land. The chemical industry has to adapt. For the chemical industry, this means a reduction by 40% of carbon dioxide emissions. So changing to a circular and bio-based economy is massive if you think what needs to be organized at a national scale. And that sets pathways for basically the knowledge and innovation agenda, investment agendas, R&D, etc., etc. Well, to wrap up my presentation, I think that circular economy and the bioeconomy is happening today. Front-running businesses are embracing it. It's happening everywhere, in the Netherlands, in Vietnam, in Ghana, in Canada. It's an opportunity. It's about resilience in future markets, but we need to innovate and scale up fast, and businesses really can't do it alone. So we need everybody on board. And with that, I think back to the moderator. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank. I really appreciate the photos and examples. That really brings the topic to life. So thanks for that. All right, we'll move on now to Dave Smarden from BioEnterprise. Dave, please share your presentation with us.
Thanks, Jennifer. and thanks to all of you who are participating today. I don't know how many of you know who and what BioEnterprise is, but I'll give you just a brief 30-second overview. We've been around since 2003. We are a business accelerator that focuses on agriculture and food and all of the variations that come out of agriculture and food. We are national across Canada. We have offices in almost every province. And we've seen somewhere close to 3,000 companies. We track them and hopefully have a positive impact on a lot of those companies. Next slide, please. I wanted to make a comment on the circular economy because I have I guess a perspective on it from the ag and food arena that may be different from some of the other sectors. And I'd be interested in Tracy's view of this later on when she comes on to present. When I watched the two presentations from Frick and from Dirk, I was salivating to see how far along they have come in Europe, how organized they are, and how the term circular economy is probably much better understood within industry in Europe than it is in Canada. BioEnterprise, because we've been around as long as we have found ourselves on the bleeding edge of a number of different trends, if you will. And they run everything from responsible agricultural investing to sustainable agricultural, digital ag, precision agriculture, digital food, and precision ag. I mean, we've had to educate and influence governments and the sectors on almost all of these, to a point where eventually, and it's not just what we do, but what others do as well, these terms suddenly become known and used across the entire population. To the point right now where everybody's interested in ag tech, investors are investing in ag tech, and that certainly was not the case 5-7 years ago. So when we look at circular economy, it's something that is, in my view and in my opinion, for food and agriculture, it's still something that's relatively new. It's not a term that is bandied about a lot. And if you were to start talking about the circular economy with those sectors, you would have quite a number of people at high levels that would probably give you the deer in the headlights look, and they wouldn't really know what you're talking about. So on this topic, again, BioEnterprise is in a position where we need to help influence, help educate, both policymakers, the corporate sector, and the small medium enterprises. So it's a big challenge. These relationships are also very challenging. I was very interested in the quick little example that Frick gave about the orange peels, and we see this quite a bit where you look at a waste item, and the waste item comes from one sector, but the applicability of that waste item is to an entirely different sector. Let's say the cosmetics sector, for example. So somehow you have to get into the cosmetics sector and you have to educate them on, hey, we've got orange peels here, and maybe you should take a look at orange peels and use the medicinal or health values in those orange peels in your cosmetics and your facial creams and so on. Well, someone has to educate them on that. Then someone has to go to the restaurants and the consumers and say, save your orange peels. There's a market for them. So you can see that the challenges are there, and they go across different sectors. So it makes it quite a large undertaking. And we need to have government on side and influencing this as they are doing in Europe. So again, I wish we had the kind of programs in place that they have in Europe. Next slide, please. So within the agriculture food sector, there's some key elements. And even though we don't call it the circular economy, we've been doing this for a very long time. So when you look at the transitioning to renewable and reusable resources, you look at the primary agriculture on the farm and taking the variety of waste materials that are on the farm, and we reuse those, whether it be to heat the barns or heat the horticultural systems, there's a variety of things that we've been doing. You look at the white plastic bales, the bale coverings on hay. You know, those are now being recycled into bioindustrial uses. So the first 2 points there, which is the transitioning and the redesigning waste, have been happening in agriculture for quite some time. Where we start to fall down is in the next two, which is preserving and extending existing resources. Agriculture and food are guilty of water usage. We don't necessarily recycle the water, reuse the water. We pollute the water, and that's an area that we need to focus on. And I would also say that you know, we consider aquaculture to be a form of ag. And aquaculture, we are now using, you know, growing insects and using insects to feed the aquaculture farms. So there is some of that taking place as well. But I think one of the things we have to remember, particularly in Canada, is that food and agriculture, those sectors are comprised of businesses that rely on high volume and low margin. And as a result of that business model, they're very slow to adopt new innovations. They are low risk. They want innovations to be fully proven, tried, tested, and true before they will put them into their systems. And those innovations cannot increase the cost of production, which is a big problem. So, you know, if you have something that's going to increase productivity, or it's going to lower the cost, or it's going to create better efficiencies, then you have a good opportunity to move those sectors into the circular economy. But ultimately, they need to have greater savings. And if these solutions cost more money, and that is the cost of having a circular economy, then you're going to have a very difficult time moving these businesses forward. I know there's an example. Two guys were traveling in Italy, and they went to a pizza shop, and the pizza shop was about to close, and they offered them free pizza because the choice was that either you eat it or we're going to throw it away. And this is very typical of the number of restaurants that exist across our country, and I'm sure across Europe. They are owned and operated by one or two people, and they are not sophisticated, and yet they are part of the problem in throwing out food waste. So these are all aspects of the system in agriculture and food that we need to be cognizant of, and we need to be influencing them as best we can. The other thing I would say is the millennial population is one of the populations that is going to drive that last point there, which is redefining growth by focusing on society-wide benefits. You know, to people like myself and my age group, we get it, and we think that, yes, this is something that's very important, but we also are not those who are ordering coffees necessarily on our cell phones and placing food orders on our cell phones. I mean, it's the millennial population that is doing this, and it's them that is going to, they're the piece of the consumer population that are going to drive these changes. Next slide, please. So there are some 2,700 plus companies that BioEnterprise has dealt with, and almost by definition, they are all some form of clean tech. And I use the word clean tech because that's still the moniker that everybody that I hear is using. And so clean tech is, my gosh, it's 25 years old, that term. And we need to move forward. We need to slice clean tech up and be able to talk about the circular economy as a separate entity, and probably dismiss clean tech as a term that we're using. We're seeing ag tech, digital ag, all these things are new terms that we're focusing on, and it helps us target our efforts. We have 13 subsectors within agriculture in our company. And so all those 2,700 plus companies are divided up into those 13 subsectors. They're all sustainability, they're all innovation, those are key terms. But none of those companies are categorized as part of the circular economy. And that tells me that we probably need to relook at these companies and from the aspect of looking at the circular economy and saying, here are the companies that actually participate and have innovations that are going to affect the circular economy. And we've not done that, and that's something we need to do. So when you look at this slide here, we've just highlighted 3 companies and that we've dealt with, and they are in different parts of the supply chain. I'll mention a couple of them directly. And if I go back to Dirk's slide, when he talked about his pie chart, I believe that on Dirk's pie chart, there was, of all the percentages, when we looked at the subsectors, food represented 8%, which was, very, very small. So I think that probably also tells us a little bit about, where food is on the circular economy. Next slide, please. So Sabermetrics is one of the companies that we're working with, and they're basically a high-tech company that does an incredible amount of data analysis through artificial intelligence and machine learning. And they also make use of sensors and other technologies. They recently got a big contract with one of the large meat processing plants because of COVID-19, and they're able to track the movement of everyone in that plant and everyone who enters the plant, everyone who exits the plant with respect to COVID-19, and they can do predictive analysis on the spread of the disease and so on within the plant. But they use that technology in a variety of ways. And the ultimate goal here for them is to reduce the food waste in any plant and to save them money. Next slide. Feedback is another one, and this is the one that is kind of related to the pizza story I told. There's a lot of small organizations, small restaurants, that coffee shops and so on. They make salads. They produce salads for the day. They produce pizza crust for the day, and a variety of other types of foods. They don't really know. They aren't sophisticated enough to know exactly how many people are going to come in on that particular day. And if things change on a day, they end up throwing out a whole lot of produce. So this is a company that has technology that allows them to more closely measure the amount of food that they need to order, the amount of food they need to prepare, based on the number of customers over the last 6 months that are coming in. They look at Fridays, they look at Saturdays, they look at Tuesdays, they look at time of day, all those kinds of things, and they're able to then more accurately predict the food that's needed. Next slide. And the last one here, Genesis Bio Industries. They're converting food waste to biodegradable plastics. We've seen a lot of these types of companies. There's a company that in Southern Ontario that is making those recyclable boxes, the blue boxes that you can buy in any Canadian Tire store, and those are made out of food-based biodegradable plastics. We've seen food packaging products as well that are now being made out of biodegradable plastics. There's a side story that I like to tell. A company had a food packaging product that when you particularly package meat products in it, when a certain form of bacteria began to form, the packaging would change color. And this would tell consumers that exactly how old the product was and whether they want to buy it. It would also tell the retail stores that perhaps it's time to take it off the shelf. Well, that didn't go very far. Obviously, the retail stores don't want to have their food sitting on a shelf and having it change color in the packaging. And it causes them, it's a high cost if they have to take it off the shelf and dispose of it. So the circular economy now comes into play if there's a way to take those products that have gone over, and you can distribute them and use them in some of their capacity. So technologies that perhaps weren't acceptable 5 years ago may be acceptable today. Next slide. There's a few municipalities, cities in Canada that are taking this very seriously. And so they're coming up with their own strategies. And one of those is where I'm located here in Guelph, where they are looking at all the various components that can have an impact on the circular food economy. And you can see on this that you get into things like data mapping and broadband and big data, sensor technology. The solutions to a lot of these issues and to getting people on stream with the circular food economy, are a lot of those solutions are high-tech solutions. And so we see a lot of them, but the one comment I would make is that we don't see them in the context of the circular food economy. We see them in the context of piecemeal solutions. So, you know, a robotic solution is designed for a very specific purpose. A sensor technology is designed for a very specific purpose. And that purpose does not take into consideration the bigger picture. So we've seen this over and over again in precision agriculture and digital ag, where you have all of this data that is being gathered. And so we're very good at gathering the data and storing the data, but we're not very good at massaging that data and turning it into valuable information. And I think we have the same issue here in the circular food economy. We're going to get there, but we're a long way from it today. The one thing I wanted to add at the very end of this is BioEnterprise in June launched something called Canada's Food and Agri-Tech Engine. And that was done because of the size of our country, the diversity of technologies, and the diversity of agriculture across the country. We needed to get our country working more closely together. From the universities and colleges and research institutes, to the business accelerators and incubators, to the SMEs that are producing the food and selling the food, to the large multinational corporations that have a keen interest in this. So we are in the process of putting together that national network. And it's our hope that that national network is going to help educate, influence policymakers, and move the circular economy forward in Canada. Thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for bringing the kind of agriculture's perspective, and I think you raised a lot of challenges and strengths there that we can probe in the Q&A. So with that, I'd like to introduce our final speaker, which is Tracy Casavant from Canada's National Industrial Symbiosis Program. Hand it over to you, Tracy, and then we'll get to the Q&A afterwards. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And good morning from the slightly smoky West Coast. Excuse the frog in my throat. I love that the previous speakers have put out so many of the same points. It all ties it together, which is great. That's just the title slide. So next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our efforts to foster industrial symbiosis through a particular program, as well as some other efforts. But first, I wanted to set the stage with defining what we mean by industrial symbiosis. And the definition there is adapted from an emerging standard in the EU. It's at a working group stage right now. So again, more European inspiration. So industrial symbiosis is a really important key to advancing us toward the circular economy. We know that things like design for environment, design for disassembly, the sharing economy are all important. But I think when most people think of the circular economy, they think of industrial symbiosis. And that's really that waste to input feed. And it's more than just finding and identifying the one-off examples, but it's that systems approach to making those more integrated circular flows. It's also about recognizing that we want businesses to do this. And so industrial symbiosis must represent a business opportunity, or it's never going to, to scale up and reach any kind of meaningful scale. We're looking at waste, byproducts, residuals. You can redefine them as co-products, but the stuff that right now we're paying for on one end and it's coming out on the other end in a way that we're not getting full value from. And we also know that pursuing industrial symbiosis has led us to look at circular flows of other types of resources, so energy and water, but also human resources and physical assets as well. And I love that all the other speakers have mentioned the importance of cross-sector involvement, which I think is both one of the opportunities and challenges as we look at bringing the circular economy to the bioeconomy. One of the earliest examples from the National Industrial Symbiosis Program, the model that we administer here, was from the UK, and as a result of the approach to look for symbiosis, an opportunity was established between an offshore oil and gas a hose manufacturer and a local teddy bear manufacturer. And, you know, unless you're neighbors or you have, you know, kids on the same soccer team and you start talking on the sidelines, chances are, if you're a teddy bear manufacturer, you're not commonly running into, you know, the marine oil and gas industry. So that cross-sector piece is really important. Next slide. Industrial symbiosis has been around forever. I came across an example from Roman times, where apparently in Roman times they used to leave chamber pots alongside public roads for people to deposit their personal liquid waste, which was collected and used in commercial laundries. So, you know, we've been doing this a long time. We know that some of it is achieved by those, you know, serendipitous meetings, conversations. We've been tackling waste exchanges since the 1970s. You know, the idea that if I just tell you about my waste, someone else will find it and claim it. You know, the idea of materials marketplaces. There's also been people working for decades from a technical standpoint. So the idea of, you know, doing waste audits, collecting the data, looking for opportunities. As an engineer, that was intuitively where I initially landed. And then there's focused R&D. I have this waste, I don't know what to do with it. You know, send it off for research, let's see what we can do. And then starting in the, I guess, what we can now refer to as just after the turn of the century, a group in the UK turned this on its head and looked at a facilitated approach instead, wherein instead of collecting data or requiring the businesses to kind of take action all on their own, they brought businesses together in a special facilitation process to try to identify all the symbiosis ideas, and then worked with the businesses afterwards to fill in the feasibility and business case data, and really acted as almost like personal assistants to a lot of the businesses. Next slide. And so after 5 years of running that facilitation model, which was called the National Industrial Symbiosis Program in the UK, developed by International Synergies, which was based out of Birmingham, a third-party audit was done, and the results of the NIST program in the UK were kind of staggering, beyond what anyone had expected. So what started out as a waste management program not only succeeded in diverting you know, very substantial amounts of waste, but also had a carbon benefit that people hadn't anticipated at the time. And so the report that was produced in 2010 that outlined the success of this project actually ended up getting titled Pathways to a Low Carbon Economy. And our sun is now rising here, so I apologize for the glare, but I may have to get up and adjust the blinds. So the National Industrial Symbiosis Program has been vetted by groups at the EU Directorate General for the Environment, the OECD, the G7, and all those other means of achieving industrial symbiosis have had success. But what we've seen is that that facilitated approach helps us get the most industrial symbiosis identified and the most implemented the fastest. Adjust my screen to adjust the glare there. So we, after several years of seeking the opportunity to bring NISP to Canada, we secured funding to deliver a pilot in Metro Vancouver and Greater Edmonton. The funding was for 18 months, we stretched it to 20 months. And during that time, we were able to engage more than 500 participants from the two regions. We had 4 full-time facilitators, 2 in each region, working to work with the businesses. We were able to tease out more than 1,900 specific resources, which corresponded to 3,500 potential symbiosis opportunities or synergies. And then our facilitators were able to actively work with 160 of those opportunities, working with the businesses to try to help them implement. And what was interesting is that we found that businesses, we have, you know, drove more than 100 kilometers. We had businesses drive 400 kilometers to participate in a matching event. So there's clearly some pent-up demand. Even if the terminology circular economy is not widely known, the idea of trying to find additional business opportunities so that you can get, make some money from your waste streams clearly struck a nerve. Next slide. One of our funders, we had 8 funders from 4 different levels of government. One of our funders was the BC Ministry of Agriculture. And they, in hindsight, very helpfully tied their funding to the request for a report at the end, highlighting the different agricultural impacts from the program. I apologize, I'm really gonna have to close the blind because I cannot see, just, sorry, one moment.
No problem, Tracy. There's no problems us seeing you, but if that makes it easier to present, totally understand.
Yeah, the sun is rising here. So with that funding, it provided the impetus to go back through the results and really tease out what happened with the agricultural value chains participation, but also, generally with other bio-based resources. And what we found was that of those 1,900 plus resources, a significant portion of them were actually what we would consider bio-based wastes. So everything from waste from algae production, spent mushroom compost, our burgeoning cannabis industry, of course, is generating its own bio-based wastes. I was telling Jennifer one of the apparently most tragic wastes we came across was chocolate chips that were going to the landfill. Blueberry farmers who reported that they kept a pit in the back 40 where lots of blueberries went if they couldn't find pickers in time, or there was a bottleneck at packing or freezing facilities. So again, the idea of pits of blueberries, and back to the the comments about oranges and cosmetics. Well, blueberries and cosmetics, my goodness. So you can see there just some of the really diverse bio-based wastes that were teased out. And I think it's also important to note that some of the businesses that we could definitely park in the bioeconomy, ag value chain, forestry value chain, they also generate wastes that are not necessarily bio-based. And so we saw some of those in the program as well. Next slide. And a lot of those wastes were tagged in the matching events for potential matching, where another business said, I have something you want, or we want something that you have. So of those, of all of the matching opportunities, 37% of them involves something in the ag value chain. And so as an example of some of the matches that were made, those off-spec chocolate chips thankfully found a home in a local, very sustainably minded donut company who said, well, we can melt them down and use them. We don't need to buy, beautiful chocolate for that. And in fact, we can use them sometimes when we need chocolate chips, because our customers would probably get a kick out of knowing that they're eating off-spec chocolate chips. There's a company in the interior of BC which is harvesting pine pollen for medicinal use. And they had spent pine pollen from their process. And we matched them with a cosmetics company, which did some research to see if they could develop a kind of a made in BC pine pollen cosmetics line. And certainly multiple wastes were identified that could be used for renewable natural gas generation. And those are just a few examples. Next slide. We also came across some incredible entrepreneurs, and I love that the theme of entrepreneurs has come up in the other presentations. One of which is a startup company called 7 Leagues, and its founder is looking to commercialize the production of leather from waste fish skin. Of course, here in BC, we are on the ocean, and so we do have a fishing industry that is producing waste fish skin. And the indigenous peoples worldwide have been producing this, for a long time. And there have been some efforts, again in Europe, to try to scale up, but it hasn't gone much past a larger artisanal scale. And so what the entrepreneur is trying to do is really reach a scale that is commercialized. She's also very sustainably minded, and wanted to look for improvements in the tanning and production processes that would reduce her environmental footprint. And so it was through that drive that we had a research opportunity come up, where she was matched with BioDesign partner FP Innovations, who is helping her to develop plant-based tanning chemicals to replace the other tanning chemicals, which, given the size of the industry worldwide, you know, if that works, could end up being an exportable technology. So one of the things that we've seen is just looking for these symbiosis opportunities catalyzes innovation and regional applied research and development opportunities, which is also what has been seen in the delivery of the NIST programs in many other countries. And we definitely prove that again here. Next slide. So at the end of our pilot, we diverted more than 250,000 tons of waste from landfill. And just in the data that we collected from businesses that were working on implementation or had gone through implementation, we avoided almost 24,000 tons, not kilograms, tons of greenhouse gas emissions. So that's about 5,000 cars on the road for a year. And interestingly, the thrust of the program is that it is a business opportunity. The circular economy is a business opportunity. So there were no businesses who were forced to implement any of their matches. In fact, a good number of them fell off the table as soon as people returned to their offices, when they sat back and went, oh, actually, you know, that's not as much quantity as I need, or, you know, or whatever. But they only implemented what made sense to them. So with those parameters, no new regulatory drivers, we documented $6.3 million in economic benefits to the participating businesses. And when we price the carbon in, that's a return on the government investment of about 7 to 1. Next slide. I should actually mention, back to the previous slide, implementation, like in most programs, follows that classic hockey stick curve. So, you know, in the 20 months, we were only just starting to see implementation ramp up. And we know from looking at the first 5 years of the program in the UK that we would have seen implementation, and therefore the accruing benefits accelerate as well had we had the funding to continue. So coming out of that pilot, we saw, not unexpectedly, that many of the symbiosis opportunities are outside the normal supply chains. You know, certainly some of the examples that we've seen here, where you've got, you know, a bio-based waste that has a use in cosmetics or construction. We also came across some, like I mentioned, amazing circular economy entrepreneurs who were frustrated because they don't fit the clean tech mold. So in terms of accessing funding and support, you know, they were working on solutions that increase the environmental benefit, right? There were always environmental benefits on what they were working on, but they never fit the clean tech mold. And in fact, NISP itself, frustratingly, doesn't fit the clean tech projects or funding scheme generally, because most of the clean tech funds focus on those capital projects, shovels and ribbons. We were able to prove that even in Canada, looking for symbiosis opportunities creates research and development opportunities. There were way more opportunities than we had facilitator time. Facilitators really are superheroes to the businesses involved. I mean, it's everything from forcing businesses to follow up and meet, to physically driving to site A, collecting a sample of the waste, delivering it to site B, and everything in between. And with most of the Canadian economy, and definitely most of the British Columbian economy comprising small and medium-sized enterprises, that facilitation role to advance symbiosis is even more important. We were also somewhat surprised because the matching events are in person, and there's a great buzz generated in the room, and everyone gets a chance pretty much to connect with everyone else. So there's that initial relationship, which usually leads to trust, is established in that process. There were a lot of opportunities that we thought were no-brainers. And leaving the workshop, every business who attends gets a list of their matches and the contact information for the person who had or wanted the other side of the match. But we really found that there was a lack of direct business-to-business follow-up for implementation. And given that the majority of the program costs are people costs, you have to weigh whether or not it makes sense to dedicate facilitators to working on implementing, what should be quite easy opportunities. So rather than providing assistance where a detour to R&D is required, some of the more complex but larger opportunities. And we definitely saw that, the role of the bioeconomy was so much greater than we anticipated. And really, I think the bioeconomy and the circular economy work better when we pursue them together. Next slide. So coming out of our successful pilot, we had great hopes building on the success to expand outward and upwards, and we've certainly had interest from regions across Canada. The funding has remained a challenge, and I know that there are people on the line who represent various funding programs, and I want to issue a plea for performance-based opportunities that don't necessarily require a shovel and a ribbon type project. I would be hard pressed to provide very many sexy photo ops from the outcomes of the Symbiosis program. There are some fantastic companies that you could tour, but in terms of the tangible symbiosis, it's definitely not as visually impacting as putting a shovel in for a new plant. So we, in conversations with the existing partners and explorations around how could we continue this, we were really directed towards looking at the creation of an innovation ecosystem of which symbiosis would play one pillar. So I've had conversations with BioDesign and a few others on the line, just really trying to sketch out what that might look like. And I'm so pleased that the European program heads are here on the call, because I would love your input in the Q&A. What we're circling around based on our experience in NISP is that if we were to create a circular bioeconomy innovation network or ecosystem, we have 4 areas of operation, and I've structured 8 specific projects, in part because the funding program that we're looking at really requires concrete project definition. So the idea would be to foster bioeconomy symbiosis by delivering facilitated industrial symbiosis across the country, using the NISP model and also leveraging the efforts of Synergy Quebec. Supporting that with marketplace technology, so the digital marketplaces. There have been some great evolutions in the technology that should overcome some of the barriers to use of the older waste exchange databases. So in particular, we're really excited about BizBiz Share, which is a Quebec-based technology that were launched here in BC, because it has in-platform transactional capabilities, and hopefully it will help us to identify the more symbiosis opportunities that need facilitation to close, but also provide a place that we can pass back the easier matches from the facilitated approach. So they really complement each other. We've seen we need practical research and development, the very early stage. So not only do the circular bioeconomy entrepreneurs not fit the clean tech accelerator space, this is really bleeding edge. And so most of them are back at the very early incubator stage. And we have great accelerator support across the country. There's so many different networks, including BioEnterprise. But that incubator stage, there's still a bit of a gap. And we need to continue to support projects, like 7 Leagues, where they can get access to that applied waste to product R&D. Capital projects, we do need. I want to see facilitated industrial symbiosis continue, but I also recognize that some of the larger scale opportunities are also so critical. And so we need to have the capital piece, which includes the Ag Symbiosis Center that Chris Bush talked about yesterday. So that would be a showcase example of a capital project, and support for other pilots and demos. And I also think that we're looking at the circular bioeconomy. We need national integration and cooperation, but ultimately a lot of the action is at that regional scale. One, because that's where we respect our ecosystem's carrying capacities. You know, two, with economies largely made up of SMEs. That's where the action will happen, and symbiosis opportunities are impacted by transaction costs, which of course increase if you have lots of transportation. So we need that kind of knowledge exchange and policy development piece. So there's a conversation with local and regional governments over, that's great that you are developing waste, hemp waste to biocomposite building panels. But if you are not also looking at us, for us, the impact on building code and training that our building inspectors might need, you're not going to get to commercialization. And so I think that two-way conversation is really important. And continued education and outreach, dissemination of success, engagement, and making sure to at least make sure that not only people in the bioeconomy understand what's going on, but also that the buzz is great enough so that those cross-sector opportunities aren't missed as well. Next slide. And that is just my idea. And it's a work in progress. And I'm hoping part of this session can be to get some really good feedback about whether we need to blow that apart and look at a different model or not. I just want to close specifically on the role again of symbiosis in a circular bioeconomy innovation ecosystem. We need dedicated bioeconomy symbiosis facilitators, and they would work either on opportunities that involve a bio-based resource, or specifically where one of the parties was officially a bioeconomy business. We would need to deliver some of those facilitated matching workshops, and we're working on adapting those in a COVID physical distant world. And I think we do need support from digital marketplaces so that we can reach especially rural and remote communities where there might not be regular facilitator visits, and just to provide that complement to what's going on in the facilitated programs. And as a pass, this might be what the deployment of bioeconomy symbiosis facilitators look like. Last slide. Next slide, sorry. And just to drive this point home again, we've seen a few sketches like this, and I think it's really important to understand that, yes, we're looking for new things we can make from upstream wastes, but we also need to consider that then those new products will be produced somewhere. And so we need to then also look at the flows in and out of that facility, some of which may be bio-based and some of which may not. How do we continue to add value to those wastes? And how do we work to find new uses for the products that come out of there as well? So this is obviously very simplified. We would look to a much more complexity of circular flows. Last slide. So I would like to, close by issuing an invitation to co-create a circular bioeconomy innovation ecosystem. I really want to see the facilitated symbiosis happen, and the circular bioeconomy incubators. That is our prime role, and I'm looking for partners to help flesh out and find homes for all these different pieces. So I want to start the Q&A with my own question. So, could you influence the national conversation? And, hat tip to Jeff Passmore, who flagged to me behind the scenes about the impending throne speech. Provide funding that's not just for a shovel and ribbon project. Loan us a professional, an in-kind contribution who could be trained as a bioeconomy symbiosis facilitator. Integrate your project into the ecosystem. Help out with grant writing and communication, bring other skills and talents. It's a big bio-based tent. Next slide. And that's all. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I look forward to the next discussion and Q&A.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I love the concrete examples of success you gave, as well as some concrete next steps and questions and calls to action to the audience. So I think that's a great place to leave off and start our Q&A. So we have probably about 25 minutes to discuss some of the questions. I had a few prepared in advance, and we've had some really great ones come into the Q&A box as well. Anyone listening has additional questions, please type them in and we'll try to get to them. And it's always nice to start on a positive note. So there's been a lot of positive comments in the Q&A box as well. People are saying that the NISP Canada pilot sounds great and would love to help move it beyond a pilot. people saying, oh, I've lost them here in the answer box. But yeah, some really great positive comments here. So first question I wanted to ask that comes from the audience is about, well, since we have a panel here that represents both Canada and Europe, I think this is a great question. So the question is, why do you think that in spite of some of the strong similarities between GHG mitigation plans of the governments in Canada and the EU, there appears to have been a little increase in the trade and investment growth in the bioeconomy, assisted by the Canada-EU trade agreement? Anyone want to take a stab at that one? But would love to hear your thoughts on you know, the relationship of a trade agreement and how we can do that bilateral, elevating the amount of investment in bioeconomy projects. What could make that happen better?
I'll take a crack at the reasons why. And I think we've just lived through the last 8 months of it. I think the COVID-19 situation has taken all of the resources in our federal government and moved them into short-term tactics to fight COVID-19 and to fight the ramifications of the pandemic. Prior to that, I think foreign policy has really been dominated by our friends south of the border and how to deal with Donald Trump and the various trade situations that have been piling up against us with softwood lumber and aluminum and steel. So I think while the bioeconomy from time to time has hit the federal government and has had a lot of interest, I think the last 4 years it's just gone off the rails, and they've had to be reactive to what's going on in the world rather than being proactive.
Maybe I'll follow up on that with Dirk. Back to the question, I think we're asking, you know, there's a lot of similarities in policy between GHG mitigation plans in Europe and in our country. So if those policies should be fostering similar kinds of opportunities, or you think there are reasons there should or should not be more investment and trade between our regions around these?
I think one of the problems of these trade agreements is, you know, politicians, I was just explaining, and I think all the speakers did the same. If you talk about circular bioeconomy, it's about, you know, creating synergies, bringing different sectors together. But this is something that should also happen at political level. What we see at political level, certainly in Europe, and I think that's everywhere in the world, you know, trade is one issue, research is another issue, environment is another issue. And I think even at political level, the politicians also, you know, work in silos. And I think what we just have seen from the European perspective, and I just listened also to Dave and to Tracy, I think there are huge opportunities to collaborate. There are a lot of similarities to what we do with our partnership and what I have seen, you know, as the examples that Tracy explained. And I think we don't even need always this kind of, that shouldn't be any kind of a trade agreement, but we can really, you know, stimulate the collaboration between European companies also and Canadian companies, you know. And these fields, what I have seen, often we have small companies, you know, it's not always the larger companies. Often we have very innovative small companies active. And our European companies are even not aware of what is happening in Canada. You know, even at European level, they are active in the region. They are not aware of what is happening in another member state. So I think we can certainly do something, because some of the technologies that we are developing here can be used for some waste streams in Canada and vice versa. So we can certainly, you know, stimulate this kind of collaboration. And I'm not always convinced that that has to be part of a trade agreement. So there can be other agreements to stimulate this kind of collaboration. And it's certainly worth to do it.
Thanks. That's a great answer. Does anyone else want to weigh in that question? Or if not, I'll move on to another one. Yeah. All right. So another question I really liked was about food and consumer trends. So the question starts with some data. So about 60% of food in the Canadian system turns up as waste. If it's recovered, what will that mean for consumers? Will the prices for them drop? Like, is there going to be that kind of lever where circularizing that is actually going to increase affordability of food in our country? And maybe to talk about some alternative uses as well. What benefits consumers are there? And is it going to displace any other important products from the market? So kind of talking about if we were to pick up that 60% of consumer food waste, what kind of disruptions would we be seeing from a consumer perspective? Maybe I'll pose that to Dave, because he was talking a lot about food. And I know he talked about some companies as well who are looking at food waste. So, and I think this touches again on a lot of comments about how we need as a group need to increase awareness of what circular means. So that's my question. Food waste, circular, and what does that mean for consumer if we're successful in disrupting some of these?
I guess I'm a little pessimistic on the pricing question. I don't believe that a price discount would necessarily be passed on to the consumers. I don't necessarily believe that the food would become more affordable. But I think you end up with a much healthier industry. And perhaps over a much longer period of time, you might see some benefits on pricing, but I don't think it would be immediate, that's for sure. And I guess, are these new uses of waste materials going to supplant other current products? There's always that possibility, but as some of the other speakers have talked about earlier, it's always going to come down to price and cost. So if you're going to take that orange peel and you're going to put it into cosmetics, are you supplanting something else? Perhaps, but only if that orange peel is costing less or is providing much greater value than the incumbent product. So, I think these things are all possibilities, but I don't think you're going to see anything, any dramatic and immediate impacts as a result of doing this. I think it's very much an evolution over a long period of time.
Can I stir the pot there? I think absolutely we are trying to displace other products. Because ultimately this is about decarbonization. And so if we are replacing a fossil fuel derived plastic with a bioplastic, then generally that's probably a good thing. Now I come to all this from a background in chemical engineering, and most of my classmates, a good chunk of them, ended up working in oil and gas or petrochemicals. But I can tell you that they have the skill sets to help advance the bioeconomy and a circular bioeconomy. So at the same time that we are, I think all of us collectively, we can't tackle climate change without completely shifting the fossil fuel sector. But we can't forget that there is so much talent and expertise and experience there. And we need to make sure that as we are growing one sector, we are kind of bringing along that talent and experience and expertise as we do what we want to do, which is, replace those products.
I don't disagree with anything you've said. I think you're right on the money. The only thing I would add to that is the experience we've had so far in the bioindustrial area is most of those solutions are very expensive to underwrite on the research side. And if you are going to displace something, which I agree is the right thing to do, it has to have the cost benefit. People aren't going to pay more money. History has told us they're not going to pay more money for a green solution. At the end of the day, 3M, Unilever, whoever it is, are going to make their decisions primarily based on profits, costs, and what happens in the boardroom.
If I can add, I think I agree. So if you are a food company and you have waste, normally, it costs money to treat your waste. If you can make products with a higher added value from your bio waste in collaboration with other companies, you can make money. But in the beginning, you have to invest a lot in research. So this will not happen. This is a risky business. This can only happen if you have also some public support to do that at a certain moment. But this is the waste, let's say, from the food, agri-food. Then you also have the waste from the, I would say, the bio-waste from the households. If we just published a study in Europe, I think only 15 million tons from the 60 million tons of food waste from the households is collected. So there we have a second problem, that's the collection systems. So we have to invest in collection systems to collect the food waste from in the municipalities. And this is also a cost. So there also you will need some well, policies, first of all, but support to set up the collection systems. So, you know, having an impact for the consumers, lower prices, yes, but that will certainly be on the long term. You first have to invest in collection, in innovation, in research, and so on.
Thanks, Dirk. Frank, do you have any comments on that question?
There are different angles to it. If you look at organic waste, you're talking about the waste market, and whatever way you look at it, the waste market is a cost. So you can make it more efficient, but it's a net cost. And on one side, you need to push the waste market, let's say, further, higher standards, obligations for companies or municipalities to collect better, to recycle better. On the other hand, the more you can take value out of it, the better. But so far, of course, companies on the first hand, they let's say, look at the whole discussion in waste management with the use of recycled in products. They say, okay, we want to have it. We want the quality, the quantity, the consistency, the continuity, but it cannot be higher than the virgin price. So in there you have an issue, because before you have something which is, let's say, can compete, you need to invest first. And that's, I mean, it takes some time to get there. You have to work on the waste management side at the same time as you have to work on innovation. What's changing, however, and I definitely think that's happening in Europe, is that, let's say, little by little, the consumer is more aware of food loss, is more aware of healthy food. If I look at the recent statements from the CEOs of Ahold Delhaize, the largest supermarket chain in our area, they see this trend among consumers, that they're more concerned, that they buy more biological food. There is an 8% growth in, let's say, biological food, organic food in the Netherlands. You see that Shell is responding to, let's say, the climate targets in the time that the oil price has never been lower. They have, let's say, have a higher climate ambition. So this is happening today. It's a slow trend, but it's there. And if I'm a multinational, you know that typically R&D takes you, let's say, 2 years, in bio-based industry, probably 5 years. Then you go for 1 year of permitting, 2 years of building a plant, and then your plant is 20, 30 years in operation. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that in 20, 30 years from now, there will be a different mentality, there will be a different climate price for carbon. So if you think about your future market, you have to act now. And first movers have the biggest market. So I think if you think ahead about future market, you will make different choices. Back to the moderator.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on. We don't have too much time, so I want to get to some other questions that we have. This is a question. So for background, like there's a bio-preferred program in the United States where a consumer can see a label on a product and know that it contains bio-based content. I imagine there's things like that in Europe as well. So thinking about networking, matchmaking programs like Tracy's program with NIST, would a procurement program like a bio-preferred certification, would something like that help with the matchmaking program, the industrial symbiosis piece? Would it help for us to have certifications or labels that that products could attain to certify their bio-based?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not just about bio-based materials, but it's certification in other sectors as well. So most of my colleagues at Lighthouse work in sustainable building, regenerative building. And we've certainly seen that a lot of the green building rating systems, you know, in particular, LEED, has been driving an increase in the development of building products, for example, that contain renewable materials or recycled or reused materials. So anything like that that drives demand is of course helpful. I think that's where that policy piece comes in the innovation ecosystem too.
Thanks.
I think in Europe, I certainly agree that certification labeling is crucial, because you have to explain to the consumers in one way or another that you make a product which is bio-based, and you also have to explain why it is better than, let's say, a more conventional product. In Europe, at least, I'm not convinced that a program like the Bio-Preferred program in the States would bring a big benefit, because in the States, you know, the market for the Bio-Preferred program, like all the ministries and let's say at federal level, is huge. In Europe, it's so fragmented because every region has its own program, I would say. I think what is has more impact is that the companies and the brand owners that bring products on the market are more involved. Because if Coca-Cola says we want to, you know, commercialize a bio-based bottle, they can easily convince the consumers and explain to the consumers what is the benefit and what does that mean. So having the companies like the Procter & Gamble's and the Unilevers and the Coca-Colas and the PepsiCos and so on involved in projects, bringing the products to the market, probably also investing a bit in the marketing and paying the premium in the beginning to launch the product. I think this is really crucial to convince consumers that these products exist and what is the benefit of the project. So we have to involve much more the brand owners in this, let's say, in this initiative.
How much of the brand owners' participation is driven by the EU legislation, which is a stronger driver than here? I'm thinking of the role of those same companies here in Canada.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's difficult to measure. I think many of the companies, and I can see to the member, if you look to the members, most of the companies in the beginning became a member because they saw that there is legislation coming that will push them to valorize side stream waste streams, because there's a lot of legislation also to reduce food waste and so on. But on the other hand, once you have 1 or 3 companies and you have some case studies, then others are joining. And so it's accelerating now, not so much anymore because of legislation, but because they can see that there are some case studies, that there are some examples, and then they also want to participate in this kind of projects. That's more for the food companies. The brand owners, let's be very honest, I think the brand owners will participate because mainly the young people in Europe, they see that, you know, the millennials and the younger people are really going for more green products. And if it costs a bit more, well, they don't care so much. So I think on the long term, these brand owners are also using, let's be honest, these bio-based products as a marketing, let's say, product, but it helps to create a market. But it's going very slowly, I have to admit. It's going very slowly. There's a huge effort to do there.
Frank, I saw your hand up. Do you have a comment?
Yes, I think that working with the big names, I think indeed can be very effective. As we've seen in the world of packaging, that there has been huge global commitments at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And if you want to live up to that commitment, for instance, that your packaging is either fully recyclable or bio-based, you have to live up to that not only in Europe, but also in Ghana, in Vietnam, Indonesia, and Canada. And that means you have to line up your value chain. That means there should be a collection system. Something is only recyclable when it's actually collected, sorted, recycled, and applied. So can be a strong market power from, let's say, the Unilevers, the Coca-Colas, the Procter & Gamble's, if they actually start walking the talk of their global commitment. And indeed, the young generation is speaking up, and that will create some additional pressure. So they'll have to walk the talk. So I expect a lot from that angle as well.
Great. Next one I wanted to ask, this is kind of a statement. So I'm gonna make a statement that was made by the audience member and ask you to comment on it, agree or disagree. So he's saying we should be focusing our information and lobbying efforts on government policy. Everyone wants money, but governments are going to be broke. Policy, tax, regulations, procurement don't cost governments much money, but can be more long-lasting market facilitators than spending programs. If the policies and the penalties are material enough, the industry and the market will pull the biocircular economy as a matter of shareholder necessity. Anyone want to comment on that? Do you think shareholders ultimately could drive this forward? That's a large statement.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at part of it anyway. I think that that statement is on the money from a standpoint of government, and that there are a lot of different ways to crack this nut, and it's not just throwing money at it. So I do think there's huge opportunities to have greater collaboration between Canada and Europe. So often is the case, we look south of the border and we try to collaborate with our partners in the United States, and that's become more and more difficult over the last few years. But here we have, a European economy, which is very much has a vision and has some long-term objectives that are right in line with what we're talking about here today. So I think it makes a lot of sense to be lobbying the government, not for dollars, but for other forms of support, and policy is probably number one. So I would totally agree with that. As far as the corporates go, I've been, I guess I have a very pessimistic view about the culture we have in Canada from our national corporations in agriculture and food. They don't typically give very much to the ecosystem. They don't spend a lot on research. The companies that we see that do spend on research are often foreign companies. So the Danones of this world and BASF and so on. So we have been trying for a long time to get the Canadian companies, the big ones, to support the ecosystem and various types of initiatives. This would be a perfect one. But so far we have not had much luck, and I don't have a magic bullet as to what we do to get them on side.
Well, hopefully this forum can generate some buzz around that, and I certainly hear what you're saying. Business-led innovation has been a struggle in a lot of different sectors in a lot of different regions. So that's definitely a piece of this. If I may insert my own comments. Okay, back to the actual panelists. Yeah, I can move on to another question. We're getting close to closing.
Maybe can give some elements from the Dutch side. Some regulation is actually quite easy, no? I know that the Dutch government has been very reluctant for many, many years to have a ban on free plastic bags in the supermarket. But when they actually did that, let's say it was a success within 3 months, and they said, why didn't we do this earlier? Some instruments are very difficult to set up, or even political, like producer responsibility, also for packaging, for instance. But now the trend is that there will be producer responsibility with eco-modulation. Let's say if you have a non-recyclable packaging, you pay more than, let's say, if you have something which is fully recyclable or reusable. Those kind of instruments take some time, but in the end, once the system is in place, you can tweak it, raise the bar, and they can have an effect. So sharing lessons from governments from Europe to Canada is definitely something which is very useful. And that's also initiatives at the local level, how to involve citizens. So let's say community initiatives. So it's not only at national government, also regional initiatives. I think there's a lot to be learned. We can still learn from lots of initiatives you guys have as well at the local level. So it's not one directional.
Yeah. Thanks for that. One final question, and I think I'll just let everyone give a quick response to this one to respect time. So the question is the bioeconomy, and I'm going to add the circular economy, that's the subject of the panel, fell out of favor with investors following several large failures to deliver the benefits that were advertised. Investors are seeing the value in ag tech, specifically precision agriculture and protein development. Do you see this growth in interest being a long-term trend that will deliver the necessary benefits, including those that are expected from bioeconomy? So we're seeing a trend, we saw a drop off, and now we're seeing a trend in investing in circular bioeconomy. Do you expect that to continue? I'll start with Frank because he's at the top of my screen.
Let's say if I look at the Dutch experience, we have already been very much involved with agro-food because we're the second largest food exporter after the US. So we live in a tiny country, so regulation there came very natural because we had to manage our system and we were earning also money with it. So we were keep on improving it. If I look at the involvement of the chemical industry in the bioeconomy, I think that's relatively new and driven by the, let's say, the climate agreement, that now they have to invest for the future. But typically, we're talking about the time to market, technical readiness levels of 9, that takes 10 years or so. So we shouldn't expect it that from proof of concept to demonstration to flagship model, that it happens overnight. I think in Europe, the industry is maneuvering, but it goes slow and it needs to get a huge boost. We need much more programs there, and probably Dirk can add to that as well. So I think the involvement of the chemical industry was always a little bit reluctant, a little bit stalling, but now I think in the long term, they will be in the game because they have to.
Thanks. Tracy, do you have any comments on that question?
I think there's one growing driver and one new driver. So I think the whole COVID situation has made us reevaluate the role of regional economies and the importance of a resilient regional supply chain. And, you know, I think we understand that sometimes that comes at the cost of inefficient economics. And there's also the potential for creating regional inequity by focusing on that. But I do think that the current economic crisis from the COVID crisis is really making us rethink what happens regionally. And I think when we operate regionally, I think that, you know, the bioeconomy just becomes a no-brainer, right? To support that in any region, because food is such an important part of what we consume in every region, and that, you know, that's kind of the starting point. And then I think as long as we continue to really hammer home that the circular bioeconomy is really important for helping us to tackle the climate crisis. I think those are the two drivers that are going to make it kind of the time is now for this.
Thanks, Tracy. Dirk.
I think I agree with the previous speakers. I think there have been some failures, but often these were for, let's say, higher volume products, let's say, where you have to compete with existing products. So you have to invest also a lot in the marketing of the products, and that's, by the way, risky. But anyway, setting up this kind of value chains, doing this kind of investments is still a risky business. So you still need, for a few years, I'm sure, some support to de-risk investments, to go to demo projects so that you can prove your concept, that it is easier to attract investors, that you can develop applications. And that's something we will certainly need for a few years. And I'm also convinced that also in Europe, it's not only, let's say, this partnership, like I explained, but I think the involvement of the regions in the future partnership will also be crucial, because regions can help to set up local value chains, are closer to the primary sector, are closer to the SMEs. So we really have to make a good network also with regions. That's clear. But and on top of that, I have to admit, with the whole COVID crisis, there's also a lot of uncertainty for the future that comes in. So we also have to see how the impact will be, certainly for investments at the moment.
Thanks. And Dave, to wrap up, any comments on transit investment or anything to add to what the three others added?
I think the comment about the bioeconomy and losing favor amongst the investors, you know, many of us lived through a period where there were a lot of visionaries, and they were doing startup companies, and they had some really, really interesting technologies, but they were pioneers. And the old saying is that the pioneers get the arrows. And you know, often you have to go through multiple generations of technology before you start to make some money and start to realize the benefits that were talked about 10 years ago. And I think that's where we are in some ways with the bioeconomy. With agriculture, we're seeing a lot of non-traditional agriculture companies, and this goes for food as well. Non-traditional companies get heavily involved. The IBMs, the Googles, SAS, Bosch, TELUS Communications. All these are companies that are investing significant amounts of money in agriculture and food. 5 years ago, you never saw any of them. So things are changing dramatically, and I think they are going to be some of the ones, the outliers, who are going to drive the innovation and drive the interest in the circular economy, some of the traditionalists are just that. They're traditionalists, and it's going to take a lot to make them budge. They're very conservative, but the new players into the game, they'll make it happen.
Well said, Dave. Thank you. Okay, so it is definitely time to wrap up. I've actually gone a little over time, so I really appreciate everyone staying here and the audience as well. Thank you to these four panelists. I really enjoyed your presentations and discussion we had. Wish we had more time. Just to wrap up, I guess, you know, we've had 3 days of excellent discussions around the bioeconomy in Canada and examples from other places as well. The only thing I really want to do is to maybe leave with some next steps. So, you know, we've talked a lot about the Canadian bioeconomy ecosystem. And I would invite anyone listening in to, whether you're from industry, an association, government, please reach out to your local or national contacts. You know, we have great incubator organizations, associations, programs all over this country. So I think that's a great starting point for you to reach out and share information and network. You know, this conference is usually in person, so networking is taking on a different flavor lately. But there's advantages of that as well. We're all getting very fluent in working virtually, so I hope we can all leverage that to help accelerate Canada's bioeconomy. Finally, there are lots of people to thank for the BioDesign conference for today and the previous 2 days. Bioindustrial Innovation Canada is one of the BioDesign partners, but also really the host and driving force of this conference. So thank you to Sandy Marshall and Julia Strife for all their support for me hosting this, as well as the other moderators and everything they've done to pull this off. I'm very pleased with the turnout to all 3 days, and I think it's been a great activity. Thanks to the other BioDesign partners, FP Innovations, BioNB, FPAC, and Biotech Canada, as well as supporting organizations, the Lambton College and the Sarnia-Lambton Economic Partnership. Would also like to give a shout out to Murray McLaughlin, who's acted, I think he's spoken to all the speakers at this conference and helped us really develop the program. So thanks a lot to Murray.